My name is Mae Wilson, and at 67, I never expected to be burying James, my husband of 40 years. The simple black dress I wore that day meant everything to me. It was the first design that launched our careers, the dress I wore on our first date. But to my daughter-in-law Sophia, it was just a target for her mockery. If only she knew the truth behind the dress and who I really was. Before I tell you what happened that rainy afternoon, let me know where you are watching from. Please hit that like button and subscribe to join me for more stories from a lifetime of lessons learned the hard way. I grew up in a modest home just outside Boston, where my mother taught me to sew using fabric scraps she brought home from her job at the textile factory. By age 10, I was making my own clothes, studying fashion magazines I found at the library, and dreaming of a world far beyond our cramped apartment. My fingers were always busy creating something from nothing. While other kids played outside, I was inside sketching designs and stitching together my visions with whatever materials I could find. My father thought it was a waste of time, but my mother understood. She would say, "May, those hands of yours are going to take you places." She was right, though she never lived to see it. When I was 16, she passed away suddenly from pneumonia. My father, lost in his grief, barely noticed when I applied and received a partial scholarship to the New York School of Fashion Design. I arrived in New York in the fall of 1976 with $200, 3 handmade dresses, and an unwavering determination. That first year was brutal. I worked 3 jobs while attending classes full-time. My tiny apartment was really just a converted storage room, but it was mine. I slept on a mattress on the floor and used an old door propped on milk crates as my design table. But none of that mattered, because for the first time I was surrounded by people who spoke my language, who understood the power of fabric and thread to transform not just appearance, but identity. It was in my second year during a pattern-making class that I met James Wilson. He was tall, serious, and unlike most of the other students. While I was there on scholarship, surviving on ramen noodles and determination, James came from money. His family owned a chain of department stores, and he was studying fashion as a business venture. We were paired up for a project, and I initially resented him, assuming he was just playing at something I desperately needed to succeed in. I was wrong about James. Despite his privileged background, he worked harder than anyone I knew. He stayed up all night helping me complete our project when I came down with the flu. He brought me soup and talked about his vision of creating a brand that married artistry with accessibility. James had the business knowledge I lacked, and I had the creative vision he admired. Our partnership began professionally but quickly blossomed into more. On our first official date, I wore a simple black dress I had designed and sewn myself. It was elegant with clean lines and subtle details that only a trained eye would notice. James said that night, "That dress is special, May. It has soul. Someday, everyone will know your designs." After graduation, we combined our talents and started our company, Stella Nova. The name came from a night we spent on the roof of his apartment building, looking at the stars. I pointed out a particularly bright one and said that someday our brand would shine just as distinctly in the fashion world. The early years were challenging. We worked out of a tiny studio in the garment district, with James handling the business side while I designed. Our breakthrough came when a well-known actress wore one of my designs to an awards ceremony. Orders started pouring in, and within 5 years we had our own boutique. Within 10, Stella Nova had become a respected name in high-end fashion. But success didn't change us the way it changes some people. James and I maintained a relatively modest lifestyle, pouring profits back into the company, and eventually buying out early investors so we could maintain complete control. We kept our ownership private not because we were secretive, but because we wanted our designs to speak for themselves. As the company grew, we became more hands-off with day-to-day operations, but I never stopped designing, and James never stopped watching the bottom line. When our son Michael was born in 1987, we worried that parenthood would derail our momentum. Instead, it gave us a deeper purpose. We wanted to build something that would last beyond us, something we could pass on to him. We raised Michael with the values we held: dear hard work, integrity, and the understanding that how you treat people matters more than what you own. As Michael grew, he showed little interest in design but a strong aptitude for business like his father. We never pressured him to join the family company, encouraging him to find his own path. After college and business school, he worked for other fashion conglomerates, before eventually joining Stellanova in a management role. We were careful not to show favoritism, insisting he earn his position through merit rather than nepotism. For 40 years, James was not just my husband, but my best friend and business partner. We disagreed sometimes, even fought passionately about business decisions, but we always found our way back to each other. As we entered our 60s, we started discussing retirement, maybe traveling more and stepping back from the company. James had been having some heart problems, nothing severe, but enough that his doctor suggested reducing stress. But life rarely goes according to plan. One morning, while we were having breakfast, James reached for my hand across the table, smiled, and then collapsed. Just like that, the love of my life was gone. The doctors called it a massive heart attack. They said it was quick, and that he probably didn't suffer. As if that was supposed to comfort me. 3 years before James passed away, Michael met Sophia Taylor at a charity fashion event in Manhattan. He called me the next day, unusually animated, as he described this amazing woman who worked in marketing for a luxury brand. I was delighted. At 36, Michael had focused so intensely on his career that his personal life had taken a back seat. James and I had begun to worry he might never settle down. I remember feeling genuinely excited to meet the woman who had captured our serious son's heart. Michael arranged dinner at our favorite restaurant, a small Italian place where the owners knew us well enough not to make a fuss about who we were. When Sophia arrived, she was undeniably stunning, with perfectly styled dark hair, impeccable makeup, and wearing a designer dress that probably cost more than most people make in a month. My first impression was that she seemed slightly uncomfortable in such a modest restaurant. Her eyes kept scanning the room as if looking for someone important. When Michael introduced us, her smile didn't quite reach her eyes, but I dismissed it as nervousness. After all, meeting your boyfriend's parents is always stressful. The conversation started pleasantly enough, until Sophia asked what I did for a living. Before I could answer, Michael jumped in, saying Mom used to work in fashion, but she's retired now. I was surprised by his vague response, but played along. James later told me Michael had asked him not to discuss our ownership of Stellanova, wanting Sophia to love him for himself, not his family connections. We respected his wishes, though it felt strange, pretending to be something we're not. Throughout dinner, Sophia dominated the conversation with stories about the celebrities she'd met through her job and the exclusive events she'd attended. She spoke knowledgeably about designer brands, frequently dropping names and prices. When I mentioned admiring a simple cotton dress I had seen in a shop window, she laughed and said, "You get what you pay for in fashion. I would never be caught dead in anything off the rack." James caught my eye across the table, a subtle signal we had perfected over decades. We both had concerns but kept them to ourselves. On the drive home, he finally said what I had been thinking. "She's very focused on appearances, isn't she?" I nodded, but reminded him that we shouldn't judge too quickly. "First impressions can be misleading," I said, though a nagging feeling told me mine was accurate. Michael and Sophia's relationship progressed at whirlwind speed. Within 6 months they were engaged. The wedding was larger and more extravagant than anything our family would have chosen. Sophia insisted on a 5-star hotel, hundreds of guests, including people Michael barely knew, and a designer dress that cost more than our first house. When I gently suggested some simpler alternatives, she looked at me with barely concealed pity and said, "I want a wedding. People will talk about, not something forgettable." Shortly after they married, Sophia decided she wanted to work for Stellanova, not knowing of our connection to the company. She had experience in luxury brand marketing, and her resume was impressive on paper. Michael came to us uncomfortable but determined, asking if we would arrange an interview for her without revealing our ownership. Against our better judgment, we agreed, making a call to the HR director, who understood the sensitive situation. Sophia was hired on her own merits in the marketing department. We made it clear to management that she should receive no special treatment, good or bad. For a while, things seemed to be working out. Sophia excelled professionally quickly, climbing ranks in the company. But as her career at Stellanova flourished, our family relationships began to fray. Michael visited us less frequently, always with an excuse about work demands or social obligations. When they did come for dinner, Sophia would subtly critique everything from our decor to my cooking. She once opened our refrigerator without asking and remarked, "You still buy store-brand groceries. I thought everyone knew those are inferior quality." Each comment was delivered with a smile that made it difficult to object without seeming oversensitive. James urged patience, reminding me that new family dynamics always take time to settle. But I couldn't help noticing how Michael had changed around her. My once confident, kind son seemed to constantly seek her approval, adapting his opinions to match hers. As James' health began to decline, I became more concerned about the growing distance between us and Michael. During one of James' doctor appointments, he squeezed my hand and said, "Promise me you'll find a way to keep the family together after I'm gone." I promised, though I had no idea how difficult that would prove to be. The last time all four of us were together before James passed away was at a dinner celebrating Sophia's promotion to senior marketing manager at Stellanova. Throughout the evening, she talked about how she was revolutionizing the company's approach, taking credit for initiatives I knew others had developed. She spoke about the founder with dismissive terms, saying, "Whoever designed the original collections was stuck in the past. The brand needed someone like me to bring it into the modern era." I saw James wince, but maintain his gentle smile. Later that night, as we got ready for bed, he said something that would prove prophetic. "May, I worry about what will happen when the truth eventually comes out, and it always does." 2 weeks later, he was gone, leaving me to navigate not just my grief but the complicated family dynamics he had helped buffer. As I stood in our closet the night after his heart attack, my hand fell on the garment bag containing that simple black dress from our first date, preserved all these years. In that moment, I knew exactly what I would wear to say goodbye to the love of my life. The day after James died, I moved through our home like a ghost. 40 years of marriage, and suddenly the space felt cavernous without his presence. The coffee mug he'd left on the counter that final morning, the reading glasses on his nightstand, the subtle dent in his pillow. Each ordinary object now, a relic of an extraordinary love. When the phone rang, I answered mechanically. It was Michael, his voice thick with emotion. "Mom, I'm so sorry. I can't believe he's gone." For a moment, he sounded like my little boy again, not the polished executive he'd become. We cried together over the phone that shared grief briefly, bridging the distance that had grown between us. "Sophia and I will handle all the funeral arrangements," he said after we'd composed ourselves. "You shouldn't have to worry about anything right now." Under normal circumstances, I might have appreciated the gesture. But something in his tone suggested this wasn't just about sparing me pain. Before I could respond, I heard Sophia's voice in the background, though I couldn't make out her words. "We'll come by tomorrow to discuss everything," Michael continued, his voice shifting back to its more formal cadence. "Try to rest, Mom." That night was the longest of my life. I couldn't bear to sleep in our bed, so I curled up in James's study, surrounded by his books and the faint scent of his cologne. I thought about the empire we'd built together, the legacy we'd created, and for the first time I worried about what would happen to it now that he was gone. True to his word, Michael arrived the next morning with Sophia in tow. She was dressed impeccably in a designer black pantsuit that seemed more appropriate for a business meeting than a visit to a grieving mother-in-law. She air-kissed my cheek, her perfume overwhelming in its intensity. "May, I'm so sorry for your loss," she said, her voice carrying what sounded like rehearsed sympathy. "James was such a traditional man. We'll make sure his funeral reflects that sensibility." As they sat across from me at the kitchen table, Sophia opened her tablet and began outlining the plans she'd already made. A service at the most exclusive funeral home in the city. A reception afterward at an upscale hotel. A guest list that seemed to include every fashion industry name she could think of, many of whom had never even met James. "We need to send a message about the family's standing," she explained when I questioned the extravagance. "This will be covered in the society pages after all." I felt a flare of anger. This isn't about society pages. This is about honoring my husband. Michael placed his hand over mine. "Mom, we just want to give Dad a proper goodbye. He was an important man in the industry." "Your father never cared about being important," I said quietly. "He cared about being good." Sophia's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Well, we still need to consider appearances. Speaking of which, we should discuss what you'll wear." Her eyes scanned my simple home outfit with thinly veiled disapproval. I could have my personal shopper find something appropriate, something elevated. I thought of the black dress hanging in my closet preserved all these years, the dress that had been there at the beginning of our journey. "That won't be necessary," I said. "I already know what I'm wearing." The next few days passed in a blur of arrangements, most of which happened without my input. I felt increasingly sidelined in the planning of my own husband's funeral. When I tried to suggest James's favorite music be played, Sophia overruled me, saying classical strings would be more timeless. When I wanted his fishing buddies to speak, Sophia insisted that industry leaders would make a stronger statement. Michael seemed torn, occasionally supporting my suggestions but ultimately deferring to his wife. I saw less of the son I'd raised and more of the man Sophia had molded him into. With each decision taken out of my hands, I felt James slipping further away. The night before the funeral, I carefully removed the black dress from its protective garment bag. Despite being decades old, it looked as elegant as the day I'd created it. The fabric was a luxurious silk crepe that I'd saved for months to afford back when every penny counted. The cut was deceptively simple, but the construction was complex, with hand-stitched interior details that only the wearer would know about. It was in many ways the physical embodiment of our company's philosophy, understated luxury with soul. As I slipped it on, memories flooded back. James's face when he first saw me in it. How he'd touched the fabric reverently and said, "This is what makes you special, Mae. You understand that true luxury whispers, it doesn't shout." That dress had launched our careers when a fashion editor spotted me wearing it at an industry event and demanded to know who the designer was. It was the first piece in our debut collection, photographed for Vogue, and eventually acquired by the Metropolitan Museum of Art's costume collection, though I'd kept the original. Over the years, versions of it had been created for celebrities and royalty, always at astronomical prices reflecting its iconic status. To most industry insiders, the dress was instantly recognizable. But to someone like Sophia, who only recognized flash and labels, it might look like a simple, even plain black dress. As I stood before the mirror, I felt James's presence so strongly I could almost hear his voice. "You look beautiful, my darling. As beautiful as the day we met." For the first time since his death, I felt a strange sense of calm. Whatever happened tomorrow, I would face it with the same quiet dignity that had defined our lives together. The morning of the funeral dawned gray and rainy-fitting weather for the heaviness in my heart. I arrived at the church early, needing time alone before the spectacle began. The funeral director, who had known James and me for years through various charity events, met me at the side entrance. "Mrs. Wilson," he said quietly, with genuine respect, "I'm so sorry for your loss." Mr. Wilson was a true gentleman. I thanked him and asked for a few minutes alone with James before everyone arrived. He led me to the closed casket draped with a simple arrangement of white roses, James's favorite. In that quiet moment, I placed my hand on the polished wood and whispered my final private goodbye to the man who had been my world for 4 decades. "I'll keep my promise," I said softly. "I'll find a way to bring our family back together, and I'll protect what we built." With that vow made, I took my seat in the front row and prepared to face the day that would mark the end of one chapter of my life and the uncertain beginning of another. The church filled quickly as the rain continued to fall outside. I recognized many faces from the fashion industry, some genuine friends, others mere acquaintances who'd come more out of obligation than affection. James had been respected universally, even by competitors, for his integrity and vision. Several came to offer condolences, clasping my hands and murmuring memories of him. Lucinda Barrymore, editor-in-chief of Style Quarterly, and a longtime friend who knew our family well, embraced me warmly. "Mae, darling," she whispered, her eyes, taking in my dress with immediate recognition, "you look perfect. James would be so proud." She squeezed my hand knowingly before moving to her seat. The chairman of the Council of Fashion Designers, who had presented James with a Lifetime Achievement Award just last year, nodded respectfully as he passed. Even the notoriously critical designer Anton Vega, who rarely attended industry functions, had come to pay his respects. These people understood who we were, what we'd built, and the significance of the dress I wore. But they, like us, had always respected Michael's wish to keep our ownership quiet within the company. I checked my watch, noting that Michael and Sophia were running late. The service was scheduled to begin in 10 minutes. Just as I was starting to worry, there was a stir at the back of the church. Heads turned, conversations halted, and I knew they had arrived. Sophia made her entrance like a celebrity, arriving at a premiere, not a daughter-in-law at her father-in-law's funeral. She wore a black designer suit with dramatic structural elements and visible branding that seemed wildly inappropriate for the occasion. The pencil skirt was daringly short, the heels unnecessarily high. Her makeup was flawless but heavy, her jewelry statement-making. Michael walked beside her, looking uncomfortable in comparison, his eyes downcast. They made their way down the aisle, Sophia nodding regally to people she recognized from the industry. When they reached my row, Michael embraced me briefly before taking his seat beside me. Sophia remained standing, surveying the crowd with an odd smile playing at her lips. That's when she noticed my dress. Her eyes widened slightly, then narrowed as she took in the simple silhouette. "Mae," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the hushed church. "What are you wearing?" The question hung in the air. I smiled gently. "My dress from when James and I first met." She laughed, a sharp, brittle sound entirely inappropriate for the setting. "You're wearing that to your husband's funeral. It looks like something off the bargain rack." I felt, rather than saw, people around us tense. Michael shifted uncomfortably. "Sophia," he murmured, "please sit down." She ignored him, her voice growing louder. "I specifically offered to have my stylist find you something appropriate. This is exactly why I was concerned." She gestured dismissively at my dress. "Who wears something so cheap to their husband's funeral? It's so classless." The church had gone completely silent. I felt the blood rush to my face, not from embarrassment, but from a deep, simmering anger I rarely allowed myself to feel. Before I could respond, Sophia continued, seemingly oblivious to the shocked expressions around her. "I mean, we have the entire fashion industry here today. What will they think? This reflects on all of us, you know. Michael's position, my career." She let out an exaggerated sigh. "At the very least, you could have made an effort to look respectable." From the corner of my eye, I could see Lucinda Barrymore's jaw drop. Anton Vega was staring at Sophia with undisguised contempt. Several Stellanova executives who had worked closely with James were watching the scene unfold with expressions ranging from discomfort to outrage. Michael finally found his voice. "Sophia, that's enough. This isn't the time or place." But she was on a roll now. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. Look at this dress. No structure, no style, not even a decent fabric from what I can see. It probably cost less than my lunch yesterday." I took a deep breath, summoning James's calm presence in my mind. "This dress has significant meaning to me, Sophia. That's all that matters today." She rolled her eyes dramatically. "Sentimentality doesn't excuse poor taste. This is why the older generation needs to listen to professionals like me. You clearly don't understand modern standards." A soft murmur rippled through the church. I caught fragments of whispered conversations. Does she have any idea? The original Stellanova. Museum piece. Michael looked mortified, his face ashen. "Mom, I'm sorry," he whispered, but he made no move to truly stand up for me. The son who once declared head always protect me was now silent when it mattered most. I sat straight-backed, dignity intact, as Sophia finally took her seat, still muttering about appearances and embarrassment. The minister, clearly uncomfortable with the scene that had just unfolded, cleared his throat and began the service. Throughout the readings and eulogies, I barely heard a word. My mind was swirling with memories of James, with grief for his absence, with hurt at my son's failure to defend me, and with a growing resolve that something needed to change. When it came time for me to speak, I approached the podium with quiet determination. My prepared remarks were about James's kindness, his business acumen, his love for our family. But as I looked out at the gathering, I added something unplanned. James and I built our life and our business on a simple philosophy, I said, my voice growing stronger. True luxury isn't about displaying wealth or status. It's about quality, integrity, and treating others with respect. These are the values we tried to instill in our son, and these are the values that will continue to guide me as I carry on without my beloved partner. My eyes found Sophia's in the crowd. She was checking her phone, barely listening. But many others were nodding in agreement, some wiping tears. I completed my eulogy and returned to my seat, aware of the sympathetic glances from those who understood the dual meaning of my words. After the service, the rain had stopped, and sunlight broke through the clouds as we proceeded to the cemetery. I stood alone at the edge of James's grave as they lowered his casket, Michael and Sophia a few feet away, her arm possessively through his. I dropped a single white rose onto the casket and whispered a final goodbye. The reception afterward was held at the Grand Plaza Hotel, Sophia's choice of venue. She seemed to have forgotten her earlier outburst, circulating through the room like a hostess at a cocktail party rather than a grieving daughter-in-law. I watched as she worked the room, ingratiating herself with fashion executives and editors, dropping casual references to her role at Stellanova. Several old friends came to sit with me, forming a protective circle. Lucinda took my hand and leaned in close. "Mae, darling, does that girl have any idea who you're—" I shook my head slightly. Michael wanted it that way. He was afraid she was interested in his family connections. Lucinda's eyebrows shot up. Well, based on what I just witnessed, I'd say his fears were entirely justified. Later, as the reception was winding down, I overheard a conversation between Sophia and Marcus Chen, the current creative director at Stellanova, who reported directly to the board, on which I still anonymously Saturday. "The company needs a complete rebranding," Sophia was saying authoritatively. "The founder's vision is outdated. My marketing team has research showing we need to target a younger, more affluent demographic with bolder designs." Marcus, who knew exactly who I was, looked deeply uncomfortable. "The founding design philosophy is what makes Stellanova unique in the market. Our customers value the understated elegance and quality." Sophia waved dismissively. "That's old thinking. Trust me, I know what consumers want. By the way, I've been meaning to discuss my proposal for the new Sophia collection with you. I have some original designs I think would revolutionize the brand." I drifted away, my heart heavy, but my mind suddenly clear. James was gone, but I was still here. And it was time to reclaim not just my company, but my family. After the funeral, I returned to our empty house, the silence deafening. I kicked off my shoes, hung up my dress with reverent care, and poured myself a glass of James's favorite bourbon. Sitting in his study, surrounded by photographs of our life together, I finally allowed myself to truly weep deep, body-shaking sobs that left me breathless. When the storm of emotion finally passed, I felt hollow but somehow clearer. Sophia's public humiliation stung, but it had also awakened something in me that had been dormant too long. I had retreated from active involvement in the company in recent years, partly to enjoy time with James, and partly to give Michael room to establish himself. But in doing so, I'd allowed others to forget who I was and what I stood for. The next morning, I called Lucinda, one of the few people who knew the full truth about our family and company structure. "I need to talk to someone who knew James and me from the beginning," I said. "Someone who remembers." Over lunch at a quiet cafe, Lucinda listened as I poured out everything from my concerns about Sophia's influence on Michael to her behavior at the funeral. "Mae," she said finally, "James was the buffer between you and the harder parts of the business for so many years. He handled the confrontations, the difficult decisions, while you focused on design. But he always said you had a spine of steel underneath that gentle exterior." "I don't feel very strong right now," I admitted. "Grief takes a toll," she acknowledged. "But remember who you are. You're Mae Wilson. You built Stellanova from nothing. You defined luxury for a generation." Her words echoed in my mind as I drove to the Stellanova headquarters the following day. I hadn't been to the office regularly in years, preferring to work from my home studio. I signed in as a visitor, amused when the young receptionist didn't recognize my name. "I'm here to see Marcus Chen," I said simply. While waiting, I observed the office environment. The spaces James and I had designed to be collaborative and creative still maintained that energy, but there was a tension I hadn't noticed before. In the corner, I spotted Sophia holding court with several younger employees gesturing emphatically as they nodded along. Marcus greeted me warmly, ushering me into his office with obvious deference. "Mrs. Wilson, I'm so sorry about the funeral. That was uncomfortable to witness." "Thank you, Marcus. But I'm not here about that, at least not directly. I need to understand what's been happening in the company." James handled most of the operational updates in recent years. For the next 2 hours, Marcus filled me in on developments, speaking candidly once assured of my confidentiality. What emerged was troubling. Sophia had been systematically working to consolidate power within the marketing department, taking credit for successful campaigns developed by her team, and blaming others when her ideas failed. She had been pushing for a modernization of the brand that essentially meant abandoning the core values James and I had established. "The most concerning thing," Marcus said hesitantly, "is that several designers have complained about her taking their concept sketches from department reviews and later presenting similar ideas as her own." "Do you have evidence of this?" I asked, my designer's soul recoiling at such a fundamental breach of creative ethics. He nodded, pulling out a folder. "I've been documenting it. I wasn't sure who to take it to with Mr. Wilson gone, and the board. Well, you know how the board operates." I did indeed. The Stellanova board consisted of myself, 2 trusted friends who knew our identity, and 2 industry experts who did not. All major decisions required my approval, though it was handled through proxies to maintain our privacy. What Marcus showed me was damning. Side-by-side comparisons of original designer sketches and Sophia's original concepts presented weeks later showed undeniable similarities. Notes from meetings documented her taking credit for successful campaigns developed by others. Most alarming was a draft proposal for a Sophia collection that would essentially rebrand a significant portion of Stellanova under her name, using designs that appeared to be lifted from the work of junior designers. "She's been telling everyone that she's in line for creative director when I leave," Marcus added. "She implies that her connection to the family through Michael gives her special influence." I felt a cold anger, unlike anything I'd experienced before. This wasn't just about personal humiliation anymore. This was about the integrity of the company James and I had built, about the creative theft from designers who trusted Stellanova to nurture their talents. "Thank you for bringing this to my attention, Marcus. Please continue documenting everything, but don't confront her. Not yet." My next stop was the legal department, where I met privately with our general counsel, Victoria Sanderson, another longtime employee who knew my true role. Her expression grew increasingly grave as I shared what Marcus had shown me. "This is serious, Mae," she said. "Design theft, misrepresentation, attempting to capitalize on the company brand for personal gain. All clear violations of her employment contract. What do you recommend?" "We need more evidence, official documentation. I'll work with HR to pull her performance reviews, complaints filed, everything. We need to build a complete case." I nodded. "Do it quickly and quietly." Over the next week, I immersed myself in company operations in a way I hadn't for years. I reviewed financial reports, sat in on design meetings, and spoke with department heads under the guise of consulting following James's death. The picture that emerged was of a talented but deeply troubled marketing executive who had been trading on her family connection to intimidate colleagues and advance her personal agenda. During this time, Michael called several times, always with Sophia apparently nearby, making any real conversation impossible. He seemed increasingly strained, mentioning in passing that Sophia was working on something big at Stellanova, and that they were too busy for our usual Sunday dinner tradition. One evening, unable to sleep, I went to James's study and opened his desk. There I found a sealed envelope with my name in his handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened it to find a letter dated just 3 weeks before his death. "My dearest Mae," it began. If you're reading this, I'm gone, and I'm so sorry to have left you. There are things I've been wanting to tell you, concerns I haven't voiced because I didn't want to worry you. I've noticed troubling patterns with Sophia that remind me of people we've encountered throughout our career who valued status over substance, credit over creation. I fear for Michael and for the company we built. But I also know you are stronger than you believe. You've always been the heart of Stellanova, the true creative force. When the time comes, remember that. Trust your instincts. They've never led you astray. All my love forever, James. I pressed the letter to my chest, tears streaming down my face. Even from beyond, James was supporting me, believing in me. In that moment, sitting in his chair surrounded by the life we'd built, I made a decision. It was time to reclaim, not just my company, but my identity. The next morning, I called an emergency board meeting for the following week. Then I invited Michael for dinner, insisting it be just the two of us. It's time we talked about your father's legacy, I said, leaving no room for argument. When he arrived looking tired and tense, I hugged him tightly before leading him to the dining room where I'd prepared his favorite meal, just as I used to do when he was a boy coming home from school with problems to discuss. "Mom, I'm sorry about the funeral," he began awkwardly. "Sophia was just stressed and—" I held up my hand. "Michael, it's time for some honesty between us. This isn't just about the funeral. It's about who we are as a family, about the company your father and I built, and about the values we tried to instill in you." "What are you talking about?" He looked genuinely confused. "Tell me something," I said gently. "Are you happy? Truly happy?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He started to give what sounded like a rehearsed response about his successful career and marriage, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. "I've been doing some work at Stellanova this past week," I continued. "And I've learned some troubling things about Sophia's behavior there." Michael's face flushed. "She's doing amazing work. She's just ambitious." "There's a difference between ambition and dishonesty, Michael. Between drive and disrespect." I told him everything I'd discovered watching as disbelief turned to denial, then to a reluctant recognition. I showed him the documentation, the side-by-side design comparisons, the testimonials from staff. "She wouldn't do this," he said, but his voice lacked conviction. "I think you know she would," I replied softly, just as she would mock a grieving woman's dress at her husband's funeral without a second thought. He was silent for a long moment. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to protect the company your father and I built. I'm going to honor his legacy and everything we stood for. The board meeting is next week. You'll fire her. It wasn't a question. Her actions have consequences, Michael. That's something your father and I always taught you." He stood abruptly. "I need time to think." I watched him leave, hoping I'd reached him, but knowing ultimately this was his journey to make. As for me, I had a company to reclaim and a promise to keep. The week before the board meeting, I worked methodically to gather all the evidence and build support. Victoria from Legal compiled a comprehensive report on Sophia's contract violations. Marcus provided documentation of the design theft allegations. HR produced a troubling pattern of complaints from staff who felt bullied or undermined. I also reconnected with key industry allies, old friends who had known James and me from the beginning, not to gossip about Sophia, but to remind them and myself of the vision and values that had built Stellanova. Each conversation strengthened my resolve and helped heal some of the raw grief I still carried. Lucinda offered her unwavering support. "The industry is already buzzing about what happened at the funeral," she told me over coffee. "People are asking questions about who this young woman is, who would speak to Mae Wilson that way." "Most of them don't know I'm Mae Wilson, the founder," I reminded her. "But they know you're James's widow, and that alone deserved respect." She patted my hand. "Don't worry about public opinion. It's firmly on your side." 2 days before the board meeting, Michael called and asked to come over. When he arrived, he looked different, somehow less polished, but more like the son I remembered. "I've been doing some thinking," he said as we sat in the kitchen, "and some investigating of my own." He pulled out his phone and showed me text messages between Sophia and a friend accidentally left open on their shared tablet at home. In them, Sophia boasted about using her marriage to gain inside information about Stellanova, describing Michael as her ticket into fashion royalty and mocking his devotion. "There's more," he said quietly. "I found sketches in her home office designs she's claimed as her own, but with the original artist's name still on the back of some pages. And a draft business plan for breaking away from Stellanova to launch her own line using company resources and contacts." The hurt in his eyes was palpable. "I thought she loved me, Mom. I thought she respected what Dad built, what you built. I was so blind." I took his hand. "Love can make us see what we want to see." "I was afraid," he admitted. "Afraid that without my family name, without the connection to Stellanova, I wouldn't be enough. That no one would want just Michael. Oh, Michael, my heart ached for him. You have always been enough just as yourself. That's what your father and I tried to teach you. I know that now." He squeezed my hand. "What happens next?" "That depends partly on you," I said. "The board meeting is tomorrow. I plan to reveal my identity as founder and present the evidence against Sophia. Her termination is inevitable given what we know. The question is whether you'll stand with me." He was quiet for a moment. "I'll be there. Not as her husband or your son, but as an executive who believes in what Stellanova stands for." That night I carefully prepared for the most important presentation I'd made in years. I selected another of my own designs, to wear not as famous as the funeral dress, but equally significant, a navy suit I'd created for our 10th anniversary collection that had redefined power dressing for women. The morning of the board meeting, I arrived early to find Michael already there reviewing documents with Victoria. He gave me a brief, tight hug. "I'm sorry, Mom. For everything. We'll get through this," I assured him, "together." The boardroom filled quickly. The 2 board members who knew my identity greeted me warmly. The others looked confused by my presence until Thomas Reed, our chairman and an old friend, called the meeting to order. Before we begin the agenda, he announced, "I want to acknowledge a special guest today, though guest isn't really the right word." He gestured toward me. "Many of you know Mrs. Wilson as James Wilson's widow. What most of you don't know is that she is Mae Wilson, co-founder and chief design architect of Stellanova from its inception. For personal reasons, the Wilsons kept their ownership private, but in light of recent events, Mrs. Wilson has decided to step forward." A murmur ran through the room. I saw shock on some faces, dawning comprehension on others. At precisely that moment, the door opened and Sophia walked in immaculately dressed and looking confident until she saw me sitting at the head of the table. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice sharp. "This is an executive meeting." "Please join us, Sophia," I said calmly. "This meeting concerns you directly." She took a seat, eyes darting between me and Michael, who was studiously avoiding her gaze. Thomas continued the introduction, outlining my role in founding the company, my ongoing position on the board, and my design contributions over 4 decades. With each revelation, I watched Sophia's expression change from confusion to disbelief to something approaching horror. "That's not possible," she finally interrupted. "The founder was an old designer who retired years ago. Everyone knows that." "I never retired from designing," I corrected her gently. "I simply chose to work differently in recent years, more privately." "But you're just..." She gestured vaguely at me. "Michael's mother. You wear off-the-rack clothes. You clip coupons for groceries. I value quality over labels, and I was raised not to waste even when I can afford to," I replied. "Values that have served Stellanova well through economic ups and downs." Thomas smoothly transitioned to the main agenda. "We've called this meeting to address serious allegations concerning violations of company policy, contract terms, and creative ethics." Victoria presented the legal case first, methodically outlining how Sophia had breached confidentiality agreements, misrepresented her role, and attempted to use company resources for personal gain. Marcus followed with evidence of the design theft, displaying the original sketches alongside Sophia's creations. Throughout these presentations, Sophia's face flushed red, then pale. She interrupted repeatedly, offering excuses that grew increasingly desperate. "This is a conspiracy," she finally declared. You're all jealous of my success, my vision for modernizing this stagnant brand. When she ran out of excuses, she turned to Michael. Are you going to let them do this to me, your wife? I'm carrying your child? The room went silent. Michael looked stricken. What? Sophia smiled triumphantly. Yes. I was waiting for the right moment to tell you. I'm 8 weeks pregnant. I watched my son carefully, seeing the conflict in his eyes, the momentary doubt. Then he straightened his shoulders. If that's true, we'll deal with it separately. But it doesn't change what you've done here or who my mother is. The desperation in Sophia's eyes gave way to cold fury. She turned to me. You think you've won, you're nothing but an old woman clinging to the past. That pathetic dress at the funeral, that was your grand creation. It looked like something from a department store clearance rack. That dress, I said quietly, was the first Stellanova original. The dress that launched our company. The dress that sits in the Metropolitan Museum's permanent collection. The dress that sold at auction last year for $80,000. Her eyes widened. You're lying. The black dress you mocked cost more than your entire wardrobe, Sophia. But its true value was never in its price tag. It was in what it represented. The craftsmanship. The vision. The heart that went into creating it. Something you fundamentally fail to understand about this industry and this company. I nodded to Thomas, who distributed copies of a final document to everyone at the table. This is your termination letter, Sophia. It was prepared and signed yesterday based on the evidence presented today. You are being terminated for cause effective immediately. Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings. She leapt to her feet. You can't do this to me. I'll sue. I'll tell everyone what happened here. You're welcome to try, Victoria interjected smoothly. But given the evidence of your contract violations and ethical breaches, I wouldn't advise it. Additionally, your separation agreement includes a substantial non-disclosure provision that would be very costly to violate. As security arrived to escort her out, Sophia turned back for one final attack. You'll regret this, all of you. Especially you, she pointed at me. No one even knows who you are. You're nothing. On the contrary, I replied calmly. I'm Mae Wilson. And I've known exactly who I am for a very long time. After she was gone, the board meeting continued, addressing the necessary steps to mitigate damage and move forward. When it was over, Michael and I walked out together. Was she telling the truth? I asked gently, about the pregnancy. He shook his head wearily. I don't know. If she is, I'll support the child, of course. But our marriage is over, regardless. I called a lawyer this morning. I'm sorry it came to this, I said, meaning it deeply. I'm not, he replied, surprising me. I'm just sorry it took losing Dad to make me see clearly again. We walked in silence for a moment. Then he asked hesitantly, would you show me? The archives, Dad's original business plans, your early designs. I realize I never really took the time to understand what you two built. I smiled, feeling a small piece of my broken heart begin to heal. I'd like that very much. 1 month after James's funeral, I stood in the Stellanova archives, a climate-controlled room beneath our headquarters, where we preserved the history of the company. Michael walked slowly among the displays, touching sketches his father had drawn decades ago, examining the handwritten business plans we'd created at our kitchen table. I can't believe I never asked about any of this, he said, his voice filled with wonder and regret. All those years growing up, I just took it for granted. You were a child, I said gently. And later, when you joined the company, your father and I wanted you to make your own way, not live in our shadow. He stopped before a display case containing the original black dress carefully preserved. The dress from the funeral. It really is museum quality, isn't it? It was your father's favorite design. He said it captured everything we wanted Stellanova to be: timeless but fresh, luxurious but understated. Michael touched the glass reverently. I should have defended you that day. I'll never forgive myself for staying silent. We all have regrets, Michael. The question is what we do with them. In the weeks since the board meeting, much had changed. Sophia had indeed filed a lawsuit, claiming wrongful termination and marital abandonment, but faced with the overwhelming evidence against her, her lawyers quickly negotiated a settlement that required her complete severance from both the one company and pending divorce proceedings from Michael. The pregnancy had been real, though early tests suggested the timing didn't align with her claims. Michael had committed to supporting the child regardless while proceeding with the divorce. The emotional toll on him was visible in the new lines around his eyes, the weight he'd lost, but there was also a new maturity in his bearing that reminded me powerfully of James. We decided together to take Stellanova in a new direction, one that honored its heritage while embracing the future. Michael would continue leading the business operations while I returned to a more active role overseeing design and creative vision. We'd also launched a mentorship program for young designers, naming it after James. "I've been thinking," Michael said as we left the archives, "about what Dad always said about luxury with a soul." "What about it?" "I think that's what was missing for me with Sophia, with everything. I was chasing the trappings of success without the substance, the luxury without the soul." I squeezed his arm. "Your father would be proud of the man you're becoming." 6 months after James's death, we held a special event at Stellanova headquarters to launch the James Wilson Legacy Collection, featuring reinterpretations of iconic designs from our history, alongside new works by promising designers from our mentorship program. The fashion press turned out in force, intrigued by the revelation that I, the quiet widow who had been mocked at her husband's funeral, was actually the legendary designer behind Stellanova. Lucinda had helped shape the narrative, positioning it as a story of resilience and timeless vision, triumphing over fleeting trends and false values. As I prepared to address the gathering wearing a new design that echoed elements of the famous black dress while moving the aesthetic forward, I felt James's presence strongly. I had carried his memory through the darkest days, and now I was ready to carry his legacy into the light. Stellanova began with a simple idea I told the assembled crowd. That true luxury isn't about price tags or logos or status. It's about quality, integrity, and respect. For 40 years, my husband James and I built this company on those values, creating clothes that whisper rather than shout, that endure rather than follow trends. I gestured to the displays around us, the journey of our brand visible in fabric and form. The dress that launched our career, that became our signature, wasn't recognized as valuable by someone who only understood fashion as a display of wealth. But to those who understand true quality, its worth was never in question. My eyes found Michael in the crowd, standing tall and finally comfortable in his own skin. The most valuable legacy we can leave isn't measured in dollars or even in designs. It's measured in the values we pass, on the lives we touch, the love we share. The collection was a resounding success, with orders exceeding our projections and critical acclaim from even the most jaded fashion writers. But the true measure of success for me was the healing that had begun both in my relationship with Michael and in my own heart. 1 year after James's funeral, I stood in our garden planting his favorite roses as I did each spring. Michael appeared at the gate, his son James, now 4 months old, cradled in his arms. Against all odds, something beautiful had emerged from the pain and betrayal. "He's getting so big," I said, taking the baby from him, marveling at the tiny features that somehow echoed both his father and grandfather. "He's going to know all about his namesake," Michael promised. "About the company, the values, everything. No secrets, no pretenses." I nodded, thinking of the journey we'd taken. "You know, the dress Sophia mocked was valuable not because of its price tag, but because of what it represented. The start of something true and lasting." "I understand that now," Michael said. "And I want little James to understand it too." Later that evening, alone in my studio, I unfolded James's letter, rereading the words that had given me courage during the darkest days. "True class isn't what you wear, but how you treat people." James had lived by those words, and now they were our family legacy, woven into the fabric of our lives, just as surely as they were woven into the soul of Stellanova. As I looked at the designs spread before me, the future taking shape in fabric and thread, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't experienced since before James died. The dress that had been mocked had become a symbol, not of humiliation, but of triumph, not of loss, but of enduring values. Have you ever had to stand up for yourself when someone underestimated you? Or discovered that something you valued was worth far more than others realized? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. And if this story touched you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to be reminded of their own worth today. Remember, true value isn't in what others see, but in what you know to be true. Thank you for listening to my story, and until next time, hold your head high and remember who you are.